The Last Chance Cantina sat on the edge of the galaxy like a tarnished coin on the rim of a wishing well. Its exterior, weathered by stellar winds and the occasional bar fight that spilled outside, did little to invite newcomers. Yet for those who traversed the far reaches of space, it was an inevitable waypoint, a gathering place for smugglers, mercenaries, and fugitives from a dozen systems. Inside, the air hung thick with exotic smoke and the pungent odor of various intoxicants. A cacophony of alien languages merged with the discordant tones of music played on instruments never meant to harmonize. Blue-tinged lights cast everything in a perpetual twilight, hiding the grime of centuries and the expressions of those who preferred anonymity. Behind the bar, a human known simply as the bartender methodically polished a glass with a cloth that had seen better days. He was neither tall nor short, his frame lean but not gaunt. At first glance, there was nothing remarkable about him, just another earthling who had found his way to the galactic frontier. His movements were economical as he prepared drinks, never a wasted motion or unnecessary step. Fine scars crisscrossed his hands, barely visible unless one was looking for them. When he moved between tables to collect empty glasses, he did so like a ghost, silent, efficient, disturbing nothing and no one. The patrons barely registered his presence. He was background noise in a symphony of chaos, and that seemed to suit him perfectly. Another Regellian whiskey demanded a four-armed Zentari, slamming down credits on the counter. The bartender nodded once, reaching for a bottle containing liquid that glowed amber in the dim light. He poured with precision, maintaining an expression of polite indifference. Near the entrance, a group of Vraxian guards entered, their gray-green scaled bodies encased in dark armor emblazoned with the insignia of the Galactic Protectorate. They wore their authority like a second skin, swagger in every step as they surveyed the establishment. The tallest among them, bearing officer markings on his shoulder plates, flicked his forked tongue in distaste. "Filthy place," he hissed to his companions, "but useful for information gathering." They claimed a large table, shoving aside smaller patrons without apology. The bartender watched from the corner of his eye as he continued to work, his face betraying nothing. "You there, human," the officer called, snapping his three-fingered hand. "Bring us Katori brew, the strong stuff." The bartender nodded, preparing their drinks with the same methodical care he showed all customers. When he delivered the tray to their table, the guards barely acknowledged him, continuing their boisterous conversation. "Did you hear about the raid on Proxima 4? One guard asked. "Total bloodbath. The Separatists never stood a chance. The new plasma rifles worked perfectly," another said with a grin that revealed rows of needle-like teeth. "Cut through their shields like they weren't even there." The officer laughed. "Humans designed those weapons, believe it or not. The only useful thing they've contributed since joining the Galactic Alliance." Another guard snorted. "Humans. Good at making tools, terrible at fighting. No wonder they needed our protection after the Krell invasions." As they continued to mock Earth and its inhabitants, the bartender moved away, returning to his position behind the counter. For just a moment, something flickered in his eyes, a cold, hard gleam quickly suppressed beneath the mask of servility. In a dark corner, two Endorian smugglers exchanged small packages under the table, their antennae twitching nervously. At the bar, a retired pilot regaled anyone who would listen with tales of outrunning Centaurian patrol ships. Near the back entrance, a group of miners fresh from the asteroid belts counted their pay, arguing over shares. Through it all, the bartender observed, remembered, categorized. His eyes missed nothing. Not the concealed weapons beneath coats, not the hushed conversations about shipments and coordinates, not the nervous glances toward the door each time it opened. As the night's cycle progressed, a new group entered the cantina. Unlike the regulars, these individuals moved with purpose, scanning the room systematically. There were 5 of them, a mixed group of species all bearing the same insignia on their shoulders, a crimson star pierced by a blade. Bounty hunters. Their leader, a cybernetically enhanced draconian with metal plates fused to his reptilian skull, approached the bar. The room grew quieter. "We seek information," he said, voice rasping through vocal implants. "About a human warrior. One who was active during the Terran-Krell conflict." The bartender continued, drying a glass. "A lot of humans fought in that war," he replied neutrally. "Any particular one?" The Draconian leaned closer. "The one they called the Ghost. The one who single-handedly decimated the Krell command on Epsilon 6. For the briefest moment, the bartender's hand paused in its circular motion on the glass. Then he resumed, his rhythm unbroken. "Sounds like a myth to me," he said. "Drink." The Draconian studied him, then turned away without ordering. As the bounty hunters spread throughout the cantina, questioning patrons in low voices, the bartender's eyes followed them, calculating, assessing. No one noticed the slight tension in his shoulders or how his hand briefly touched the underside of the bar where something metallic gleamed in the shadows. Another typical night at the edge of the galaxy, where everyone had secrets and some were deadlier than others. The following night, the cantina was even more crowded than usual. News traveled fast in the frontier, and rumors of bounty hunters asking questions had drawn the curious and the concerned in equal measure. The Vraxian guards had returned too, claiming their usual table and demanding service with their customary arrogance. A group of miners near the back had begun a heated discussion about Earth's legendary warriors, their voices carrying above the ambient noise. "I heard the Ghost of Epsilon was just propaganda," said a burly Centaurian, his single eye blinking skeptically. "No human could take down an entire Krell command post. My cousin served in the 7th Fleet during that time," countered a gray-skinned Palaxian. "Said he saw the aftermath on security feeds. One human, no powered armor, just combat knives and bare hands. Killed 20 elite Krell warriors and disappeared before reinforcements arrived." "Impossible," the Vraxian officer called from his table. "Krell warriors stand 3 meters tall and have natural armor plating. No human could defeat one without heavy weaponry, let alone 20. The miners turned toward the guards, and the Palaxian shrugged. "Just telling you what my cousin saw," said the human, moved like nothing he'd ever seen, faster than tracking systems could follow. "Some kind of enhanced super soldier, maybe, or just a myth to boost morale during the war," the Vraxian officer said dismissively. Humans loved their heroes. Behind the bar, the bartender methodically cleaned glasses. If he heard the conversation, he gave no indication. But when he turned to replace a bottle on the shelf, his knuckles whitened momentarily around the neck of the container. A muscle in his jaw tightened, then relaxed so quickly one might have imagined it. A patron at the bar, a Telosian with translucent skin revealing a complex circulatory system pulsing beneath, leaned forward. "I heard that after the war, the Ghost disappeared. Some say the Earth military tried to terminate him, fearing his power. Others think he went rogue." The bartender slid a drink toward the Telosian without being asked, exactly what the alien preferred. "Sounds like the plot of a bad holodrama," he commented, his voice neutral. "All human warriors are the same," one of the Vraxian guards called out. "They rely on technology because they're physically inferior. Without their powered armor and pulse weapons, they're nothing." Laughter rippled through their table. The bartender's expression remained impassive as he continued his work, though his eyes briefly met his reflection in a polished surface behind the bar. In that private moment, something cold and calculating flickered across his face, a shadow of someone else, someone dangerous. As the night progressed, the door to the cantina swung open once more. The bounty hunters from the previous night returned, but this time they brought reinforcements. The cybernetically enhanced Draconian leader was accompanied by a towering figure in black armor. The newcomer's helmet concealed their face entirely, and they moved with the deliberate precision of a predator. "That's Kronos," whispered a patron to their companion, "the deadliest bounty hunter in the quadrant. If they brought him in, they're serious about finding this ghost." The room quieted as the group made their way to the center of the cantina. The Draconian's metallic voice cut through the silence. "We know someone here has information about the human known as the Ghost of Epsilon," he announced. The Krell Dominion is offering 10 million credits for information leading to his capture. At the mention of the Krell, several patrons shifted uncomfortably. The war had ended 5 years ago with an uneasy treaty, but the memory of the reptilian conquerors still inspired fear. Why would the Krell care about an old war story? Someone called out. The armored figure, Kronos, spoke for the first time, voice distorted through the helmet. Because the ghost wasn't just a soldier. He was an assassin who eliminated 3 Krell high commanders. The Dominion never forgets its enemies. As the bounty hunters began questioning patrons more aggressively than the night before, the bartender continued his routine, seemingly unaffected by the tension filling the room. But to a careful observer, his movements had become slightly more deliberate, his awareness of exits and potential obstacles more apparent. One of the Vraxian guards watched the proceedings with growing irritation. "This is our jurisdiction," he muttered to his officer. "Bounty hunters operating without clearance." The officer silenced him with a gesture. "The Krell pay well for cooperation. We'll let them conduct their search, but watch closely." As the night wore on, the bounty hunters grew increasingly frustrated with their lack of progress. Kronos approached the bar, helmet turning slowly as he surveyed the bartender. "You've been here a long time," the modulated voice stated. 3 standard years, according to local records. The bartender nodded, wiping down the counter. "The pay is decent, and no one asks too many questions." "Where were you during the Terran-Krell conflict?" "Earth shuttle pilot," the bartender answered smoothly. "Civilian transport. Nothing glamorous." Kronos stared at him for a long moment, then turned away without further comment. As the armored bounty hunter rejoined his companions, the bartender's eyes followed, calculating and cold. No one noticed how his hand briefly touched the small scar at the base of his neck, the kind left by military neural implants, long since removed. Days passed, and tension in the Last Chance cantina continued to build. The bounty hunters had established a semi-permanent presence, watching comings and goings with predatory focus. The Vraxian guards, not to be outdone on their own turf, increased their patrols and interrogations. Between these two forces, the cantina's usual clientele had begun to dwindle, frightened away by the heightened scrutiny. Only the most desperate, the most hardened, or those with nowhere else to go remained. The bartender maintained his routine, seemingly unaffected by the changing dynamics. But those who knew him best, the few regulars who had frequented the establishment for years, noticed subtle differences. He stayed later after closing, checked the security systems more thoroughly, and positioned himself to always have line of sight to all entrances. On the 5th night since the bounty hunter's arrival, everything changed. It began with a thunderous crash as the main door was kicked open with such force that it tore from its hinges. A dozen heavily armed mercenaries poured in, weapons raised. They wore mismatched armor cobbled together from various military surplus, but each bore the same insignia as the bounty hunters, the crimson star pierced by a blade. "Nobody move," shouted their leader, a scarred human woman with augmented eyes that glowed red in the dim light. "We know the ghost is here, and we're done playing nice." The Vraxian guards rose to their feet, hands moving to their sidearms. "This is a protected establishment under protectorate jurisdiction," the officer hissed. "Lower your weapons immediately." Instead of complying, the mercenary leader fired a warning shot into the ceiling. "Sit down, lizard. This doesn't concern you unless you make it your concern." For a tense moment, it seemed the guards might engage, but something in the mercenaries' demeanor, a reckless, nothing-to-lose quality, made them hesitate. They remained standing, but didn't draw their weapons. Behind the bar, the bartender continued polishing glasses, his movements unhurried despite the chaos unfolding. Only the slight narrowing of his eyes betrayed any reaction at all. "Search everyone," the mercenary leader commanded. Her followers began roughly checking patrons, overturning tables, breaking bottles. 10 million credits for the ghost of Epsilon. Someone knows something. A Palaxian miner protested as he was shoved against a wall. One of the mercenaries struck him with the butt of a rifle, sending him crashing to the floor with a cry of pain. At that precise moment, something changed in the air, a subtle shift in pressure, like the moment before a storm breaks. The bartender set down the glass he had been polishing with deliberate care. "That's enough," he said quietly. "Knuckles." The bartender stood motionless, watching him come. Something shifted in his posture, an almost imperceptible change from the servile stance he'd maintained for years to something more balanced, more poised. The first mercenary lunged with his shock baton, a move that should have been too quick for an ordinary person to avoid. The bartender wasn't there. He moved so fast that several observers would later swear he had somehow teleported. One moment he stood behind the bar, the next he was beside the mercenary, one hand gripping the wrist holding the shock baton, the other at the man's throat. With a single, fluid motion, he disarmed the stunned attacker and sent him crashing into his companion. Both went down in a tangle of limbs and curses. The cantina fell silent. The bartender stood differently now. His shoulders squared, his stance widened slightly. The careful facade of ordinary humanity had fallen away, revealing something else entirely, a predator who had been hiding in plain sight. "I won't ask again," he said, his voice carrying a new edge of authority. "Leave." The mercenary leader stared at him, her augmented eyes narrowing as understanding dawned. "It's you," she whispered, then louder. "It's him, the ghost." Time seemed to freeze for a heartbeat. Then everything happened at once. The mercenaries opened fire, energy bolts cutting through the air where the bartender had stood a split second before. Patrons screamed, diving for cover as tables splintered and bottles exploded. The Vraxian guards, caught in the crossfire, finally drew their weapons and began returning fire, adding to the chaos. Through it all moved the bartender. No, the ghost, with inhuman speed and precision. He flowed like water around energy bolts, closing distance with his attackers before they could track his movement. Each strike was economical, devastating, targeted to disable rather than kill. A mercenary's arm snapped at the elbow. Another's knee buckled from a precisely aimed kick. A third found himself suddenly unconscious, never seeing the blow that took him down. The Vraxian officer watched in stunned disbelief as the unassuming human they had ignored for years systematically dismantled a group of armed mercenaries using nothing but his bare hands. "Impossible," he hissed to his subordinate. "No human moves like that." In the midst of the fight, the ghost paused, his eyes locking with the officers for just a moment. There was no anger there, no enjoyment of the violence. Only cold efficiency and something else, something ancient and weary. Then he was moving again as Kronos, the armored bounty hunter, entered the fray. The behemoth charged forward, powered armor lending inhuman strength as he swung a gravity hammer that could crush bones to powder. The ghost dodged the first swing by millimeters, the hammer's gravity field tugging at his clothes as it passed. He countered with a strike to a joint in the armor, fingers finding the narrow gap with surgical precision. Kronos roared in pain as neural feedback from the armor surged through his system. He swung again, wilder this time, desperation replacing technique. The ghost stepped inside the arc of the swing, too close for the hammer to connect, and struck upward with the heel of his palm directly under the helmet's chin guard. The impact rocked Kronos backward. Helmet sensors momentarily scrambled. In that brief window of vulnerability, the ghost struck again, 3 rapid hits to key junction points in the armor. Systems failed in cascade, servos locked, and the mighty bounty hunter crashed to the floor, trapped in his own powered suit. Throughout the cantina, mercenaries lay incapacitated or unconscious. Only their leader remained standing, her augmented eyes wide with fear and awe. "The stories didn't do you justice," she said, backing toward the door. "They said you were fast, but this..." She shook her head. "The Krell were right to fear you." The ghost approached her slowly, inexorably. "The Krell should have left Earth alone," he said quietly. "Everything that happened was their choice." For the first time, the cantina glimpsed something behind the mask of the unassuming bartender. A flash of memory, perhaps, of orbital bombardments and burning cities, of friends and family lost to an alien invasion that had come without warning or mercy. The mercenary leader seemed to sense the danger in pressing further. She bolted for the exit, leaving her fallen comrades behind. As silence fell over the devastated cantina, all eyes turned to the man they had known only as the bartender. He stood amid the destruction, breathing steadily, not even winded from the encounter that should have left an ordinary human exhausted. Slowly, like water settling after a storm, his posture shifted back toward the familiar, unassuming stance they recognized. But it was too late. They had all seen what lay beneath. The Vraxian officer approached cautiously, keeping his distance as one would from an apex predator. "You're really him, aren't you? The ghost of Epsilon." The bartender, the ghost, didn't answer immediately. Instead, he bent down to right an overturned chair, a small, ordinary gesture at odds with the lethal efficiency he had just displayed. "That name belonged to another life," he finally said. The officer's scaled brow furrowed. "But why here? Why tend bar at the edge of civilized space when you could command any price as a mercenary or security consultant?" A faint smile touched the ghost's lips, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe I grew tired of killing." One of the Vraxian guards snorted in disbelief. "What we just saw didn't look like someone tired of combat." "I didn't say I grew tired of fighting," the ghost clarified. "Just killing. There's a difference." He surveyed the destruction around him. The broken furniture, shattered glass, unconscious mercenaries. For a moment, his gaze turned distant, as if seeing another battlefield from long ago. A young Telosian who had hidden beneath a table during the fight emerged cautiously. "The story said you single-handedly turned the tide at the Battle of Proxima Centauri, that you infiltrated the Krell flagship and eliminated their entire command structure." The ghost neither confirmed nor denied this. Instead, he began methodically cleaning up debris from the floor, resuming the role of bartender, despite the fact that his cover was irreparably blown. "Why did you leave?" the Telosian pressed. "After the war, I mean. Earth declared you a hero." For a long moment, it seemed the ghost wouldn't answer. Then, without looking up from his task, he spoke softly. "Heroes are symbols, meant to inspire. I was a weapon designed to kill. Earth needed the former for rebuilding. The latter was a reminder of darker times." The Vraxian officer, still processing what he had witnessed, shook his head in disbelief. All this time, he muttered, "We've been patronizing this establishment for 3 standard years and never once suspected." "That was the point," the ghost replied. "No one looks closely at a bartender. We're background noise." As the initial shock began to wear off, practicalities reasserted themselves. The unconscious mercenaries would need to be secured. Authorities beyond the local Vraxian contingent would need to be notified, and the cantina's status as a neutral ground had been irrevocably compromised. "More will come," the Vraxian officer said, gesturing to the fallen bounty hunters. "The Krell don't give up easily, especially with that bounty at stake." The ghost nodded once, acknowledging the truth of this. "I've stayed too long already," he admitted. "Got comfortable, careless." A heaviness settled in the room as the implications became clear. The Last Chance Cantina had been more than just a business. It had been a refuge for many, including its proprietor. Now that refuge was compromised. "What will you do?" asked a patron who had frequented the establishment for years. The ghost looked around at the cantina, at the bar he had polished every night, the worn floor he had swept, the eclectic collection of patrons he had served. For just a moment, regret flickered across his features. "What I've always done," he said finally. "Adapt. Move on." Over the next several hours, a strange calm descended on the cantina. The Vraxian guards contacted their superiors and arranged for transport of the captured mercenaries. Patrons helped clean up what they could of the destruction, salvaging tables and chairs, sweeping broken glass. Through it all, the ghost continued in his role as bartender, serving drinks when requested, cleaning surfaces, maintaining the familiar routine even as everything around him had changed. It was as though he was giving himself, and everyone else, one last night of normalcy before the inevitable departure. The Vraxian officer, who had maintained a respectful distance since the revelation, finally approached the bar when most patrons had left. "My superiors are interested in speaking with you," he said carefully. "Not to detain you," he added quickly, But they believe your insights on Krell tactics could be valuable, especially with tensions rising again in the outer colonies. The ghost dried a glass methodically before responding. I've given enough to that particular cause. The Protectorate would compensate you generously. Some things can't be purchased, officer. The Vraxian studied him for a long moment. You could have killed every one of those mercenaries today. You had both opportunity and justification. Yet you chose to disable rather than eliminate. Why? The ghost set down the glass and met the officer's gaze directly. Because I've seen enough death to last several lifetimes. Because every life I take carries a weight that never lightens. He paused. And because I made a promise to someone once. The officer nodded slowly, seeming to understand something fundamental about the human before him. Where will you go? Better that you don't know. As the first light of dawn crept through the cantina's grimy windows, the ghost completed his final preparations. He packed lightly, a small bag containing credits, identification documents, a few personal items. Nothing that would slow him down or create a trail. The Telosian youth who had questioned him earlier appeared at the door as he was about to leave. Will you ever return? The young alien asked. The ghost considered the question. Not here, he said finally, but perhaps somewhere similar. There are many cantinas at the edge of the galaxy, and all of them need someone to pour the drinks. And if the Krell find you again? A shadow crossed the ghost's face. They won't like the result any better than they did the first time. With that, he shouldered his small bag and stepped out into the pale light of an alien dawn. Just another traveler on the move, unremarkable to casual observation. Only those who knew what to look for would notice the perfect economy of his movement, the constant environmental awareness, the readiness that never fully disappeared. Inside the cantina, the Vraxian officer watched through the window as the legendary warrior walked away. To think, he murmured, we sat here night after night, mocking humans, while one of their most dangerous sons served our drinks. His subordinate hissed softly. Should we follow him? Report his direction? The officer considered, then shook his head. No, some debts should be honored. We owe him that much, at least. Meanwhile, at the spaceport, the ghost of Epsilon, the bartender without a name, boarded an unmarked transport bound for the far reaches of the quadrant. As the ship lifted off, he gazed out at the dusty settlement that had been his home for 3 years. He hadn't lied to the Telosian youth. He would find another quiet establishment on another forgotten world. He would pour drinks and listen to stories and fade into the background once more. And perhaps, this time, he could remain unnoticed a little longer. But if trouble found him again, as it inevitably would for a man with his particular history, he wouldn't hesitate to become the weapon he had been forged to be. For while the bartender sought peace, the ghost would always be prepared for war. As the transport accelerated toward the jump point, he closed his eyes and allowed himself a rare moment of recollection. Epsilon 6, the Krell Command Center, 20 elite warriors who never saw him coming. The satisfaction of striking back after Earth cities burned. Then he opened his eyes and let the memory fade. That was the past. The future was unwritten. And somewhere in the vast expanse of the galaxy, there was a bar that needed tending.